Need to get stronger after her surgery, and then Rhonda Redger is in the hospital, and need to remember her in our prayers. There are a couple of things coming up. Senior recognition will be Sunday after morning services for Courtney Tinley and Nolan, and then there's some baskets on the back table with their names on them that are great for cards or maybe other things maybe that fold, and or don't fold if they're plastic. That's too whatever. But some baskets back there for them for us to take advantage of. I feel like I'm missing something. Am I missing something? I felt like there was one more I needed to say, but I can't remember what it was. Second Sunday servants is coming up this Sunday, Sunday evening. It'll come to me later. There's more things in the bulletin. Make a Joyful Noise singing at Jeff and Julie Porter's May 24th. Ladies Eat Out May 21st. Carpenter Place donations need to be in this week. Their pickup will be Thursday, May 16th. So lots of things going on that we need to take advantage of. Okay.
I know we need rain, so what I want everybody to do is to go wash your cars. Leave them outside with the windows down, or if you've got a convertible, leave the top down, and surely it will rain. 611. 611. Walking in sunlight on my journey over the mountains, through the deep vale, Jesus has said, I'll never forsake thee, promise divine that never can fail. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine. Shadows around me, shadows above me, never conceal my Savior and guide. He is the light, in him is no darkness, ever I'm walking close to his side. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine. In the bright sunlight, ever rejoicing, pressing my way to mansions above, singing his praises, gladly I'm walking in sunlight of love. Heavenly sunlight, flooding my soul with glory divine. Hallelujah, I am rejoicing, singing his praises, Jesus is mine.
Heavenly Father, we humbly come before you and thank you for every blessing that you do bestow on us. And Father, we pray that you might be with the ones that are in the hospital, that are dealing with things and in homes. And we pray for their health, and we pray for their comfort. And Father, we also ask that you might be the ones that are traveling, coming for graduations, coming here and going. Keep them safe. And Father, we also ask that for the rain, as Chuck said, that we do need it, and we pray that you might bless us with some more rain. And Father, we ask that you just watch over us as we study tonight, open our minds, and open our hearts, and be with the ones that are teaching the classes. And this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Good evening, Justin.
Good evening.
Oops.
Getting closer to summer, you can tell as we look out into the great unknown, and there's still sunlight outside.
It is a wonderful thing to have sunlight into the evening, which I always remind people of when they say how much they don't like daylight savings time in March when the time changes. This is why I like it right there, because it's light later into the evening. Unpopular opinion. Well, are you with us one more week after this week? Maybe?
I think so.
You think so?
I think so.
All right.
Probably. More than likely. I'll
More
be
than likely here next
for
week. Okay.
Daniel and the kitty den.
Daniel, well, that's assuming we get through the many tickle you Farsons tonight.
Well, I have faith. I walk by faith and teach by faith, too.
All right. We'll see. We got a lot of accoutrements up here tonight. All right. Well, the less we chatter, the more we'll get done, I guess. We are going to really quick wrap up Daniel chapter 4 because we got to the end of Daniel 4 last week and didn't really, I didn't feel like we really got to wrap it up. So last couple of verses, which I have the heading wrong. It's verses 36, 37, and I have it as my fingers hit the wrong buttons. So verses 36, 37 are the correct verses of Daniel 4, even though the heading says 37, 38. There is no 38. All right.
All right. At that time, at that same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble.
Okay. All right. So, what an ending to the story. And we know, I mean, just from the last 2 weeks of this study, we read, we read the account. It starts off with Nebuchadnezzar praising God, and then telling the story of how he had praised himself, and had a dream about what was going to happen, and the dream troubled him. And of course, Daniel was able to interpret the dream that it was going to result in him being left out in the cold for a while, left out to fend for himself, out living like an animal, until it was time for him to be able to recognize the sovereignty of God. And then that happened. He lived out long enough for his fingernails to grow like talons and his hair to look like the feathers of an eagle. And then he had the realization that God was the one that gave him his kingdom, and he praised God, and then everything was restored to him. So we talked a little bit about that, the idea just that everything was restored. We'll kind of mention that again this week. So at this time, when his reason returns to him, it says his majesty and splendor were restored to me. Well, wasn't that what got him in trouble in the first place? Thinking of it as my majesty and my splendor, and my majesty and my splendor were restored to me. So, what was truly lost and what was truly gained in this whole episode, for a time, he lost everything, but then he got it all back. But was there anything still missing after he got all the stuff back?
Was said still more greatness was added. So he got even more.
He got back more. He got back what he lost plus more as far as stuff is concerned. But what did he lose during that time that didn't come back? And his pride. That must be true. It must be. And I think it is from what he says. He talks about, because he mentions, because of the way that he speaks about God and seems to revere God in the things that he says after this episode, you would have to say that his attitude about his own position in relation to God has changed. We've talked about this from the very beginning, from the first time we meet Nebuchadnezzar, kind of the progression of his faith journey, if you will, if you want to put it in modern day vernacular. How far does it go? How far does his repentance go? How far does his faith get to by the end of the story? Is he truly a different man at the end than he was at the beginning? It's a genuine question.
Maybe yes and maybe no.
But at this point, before, at this point, I still think we can say, yeah, he's definitely a different person.
Okay.
His attitude and his way of looking at God and realizing what God has done and what God is, it has definitely changed.
Okay.
If that's the way it stayed, then
Yeah.
it's a good thing.
It is a good thing, and I think the changes we see in Nebuchadnezzar are good. But I mean, how much time have we covered here? Did we speculate on last week? 40-some years, right? And I'll get right to you, Johnny, in just a second. We have what are there, 4 episodes out of Nebuchadnezzar's life that we really truly have much detail about that span a life of 40 years. And so for us to look at those 4 different episodes and try to determine, the level of somebody's faith or the direction that their life went or whatever based on those 4 episodes, if you had somebody, 2-3 generations down the road were able to pick out four moments in your life, even if they were big moments, like altering moments, do you want your life defined by those 4 moments? I mean, probably not. I can't think of 4 specific moments that I'd say, yeah, I'll put those up. Those would be okay. And so it's a little bit unfair to Nebuchadnezzar or anybody else to try to pick out, and try to determine, okay, at the end, do we think Nebuchadnezzar was playing for the right team at the end? That's hard to understand. It's hard to pin down. Did he make a lot of changes in his life? Did he grow? Absolutely. Did he change from the beginning to the end? Absolutely. Was he where he needed to be? Probably not, but are you where you need to be? Probably not. I mean, there's all growth that we all need to make, right? And so I feel like, on the one hand, I'm desperately curious about where Nebuchadnezzar is. On the other hand, I feel like I'm being unfair to him by trying to paint him into a corner or something. Johnny, I'm going to quit rambling and let you go.
Okay, I see him just like I see the Israelites during the Judges.
Okay.
He sees God, he said he accepts God, and then the next time you see him, he's making a statue and not believing in God.
Okay.
Just like the Israelites, they got a good judge, they were okay during the judge dies, they go right back to what they were doing. That's what his modus operandi has been the whole time. He sees God, he recognizes God, and then he goes back to what he was doing.
I think that's a great comparison, and I think we could expand that to say he's like the church in Corinth, where they accepted Christ and then they made some really stupid decisions and had to be corrected and had to set things right. And he's like the church in Galatia that accepted Christ and then was in danger of going back to an old way of life. And he's like the church in Laodicea that was in danger of leaving their first love. I mean, isn't the story of redemption the story of God pursuing us into the midst of all of our mistakes, into the midst of all of our failures, and still God pursues us along the way, and he is not content to see us. He's not happy to see us backsliding or whatever, and he continues to pursue us through it all. That's a great lesson. If we can learn that from Nebuchadnezzar and others, then that's a pretty good lesson.
Well, the last thing I put on there was just the interesting note that I had read in this, and it is very brief, sort of. But, he says, at that time my reason returned me, this is the ESV, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor were returned to me. And so, by Nebuchadnezzar's own words, one of the things that you learn as you're learning through Greek is that the prepositions really help determine the whole sentence. And what he's trying to say there is, for the glory of my kingdom. The lasting consequence of my splendor and glory returning to me, in his words, in the way that he is phrasing it here, is it's for the kingdom. And again, you might be able to say, well, that's a little bit of his own pride and arrogance coming back. But, I think where I took that was, I think that is a pretty good baseline for rulers, for elders, for anyone in any authority of power, saying, there is a certain measure of glory, of splendor, of majesty in being in the position that I'm in, but it's for the people that I'm serving. It's not for my own gain, it's not for my own, accolades, but it's for the kingdom. It's for the people that I'm trying to serve and love, and have a servant's heart. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's what Nebuchadnezzar was saying there, but the way that it's phrased led me to there, that the majesty and glory and the splendor of being king and of being a leader and of being in a position of prominence, you're there, that glory, majesty, and splendor is for the glory of the kingdom, so that you can help and serve and protect the people beneath you.
That is an interesting. I would never have made that connection because I don't know the Greeks, but so go back to verse 30, and it says the king. This is the moment that God shows up to take everything away from him, and his statement there is, "This not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence by the might of my power, for the glory of my majesty." And so now God has returned his splendor to him for the glory of the kingdom, so that he can serve the kingdom because he's recognized his position, whereas before he thought the kingdom was there for him to elevate his majesty and his glory. So that there's an interesting symmetry there to that if that's the structure of the language. So I like that. I like how he has. I mean, that indicates that he has fully shifted his point of view from it being about me to being about the kingdom. I like that. Well done.
Well, I mean, obviously this is Aramaic, but just the
well, somewhere somebody said it in Greek.
Well, yeah, I was just
the structure of the language. Yeah,
the fact that prepositional phrases are important to the sentence, and that's where that sentence is connected with that. Anyways,
awesome.
Just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, thank you for that. That was good stuff.
The last phrase there that he says, "And God is able to humble those who walk in pride." I mean, at least he kind of acknowledges he was humbled because he was walking in pride. I mean, at least, being aware and admitting to your problem is a big part of it.
That's a first-hand account right there.
Yeah, that's good.
Matter of fact, that's the next point.
Here you go. Pride is a powerful force, but humility is more so. So, good segue. Think of the power that he wielded in his pride and in his arrogance, but his humility was able to move God to act. I mean, if you think about it, it required his humility to get God to restore the stuff. So his pride caused God to move the first time, but then it was his humility that caused God to move the second time. And that's a tremendous thing. And then out of great personal loss can come meaningful worship. Imagine the day before, or even, early on in the chapter, and this is, early on in the chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is says some good things about God, and he is recounting the story after the fact, so it may influence the things that he's thinking about on the front end of the story. But Nebuchadnezzar, anything Nebuchadnezzar could have said positively about God before he lived out in the field would have paled in comparison to the worship that he could have given after that, when he finally recognizes God's sovereignty and when he truly has a more meaningful understanding of who God is. And so it took going through that experience for his worship to really take on a special meaning. And that's a hard lesson to learn. I think David teaches us that to some degree in the Psalms, with the Psalms of Lament, and the things that he goes through and that God sees him through affects the way that he worships. And when we go through those seasons of loss or those difficulties, and we learn to rely on God's faithfulness and we learn to trust in him to a deeper degree, then it affects our worship. It should affect it positively. It should make it more meaningful. Even though sometimes in the moment of those, in the valley, in the moment, worship is hard. I mean, it's hard to even achieve that thought of worship. But on the other side of that valley, the worship takes on new meaning. And that's what it takes sometimes for our attitudes about God to grow. In the end, every knee shall bow. Can you imagine Nebuchadnezzar? Can you imagine Nebuchadnezzar agreeing to bow down to Daniel's God early on in this story, early on in the book? Nebuchadnezzar would not have bowed down to a foreign god. He maybe bowed down to his own God, but really did so just as a show for the people. But now at the end of the story, Nebuchadnezzar bows because he recognizes God's sovereignty. And there are those today who make the bold claim that they would never bow before any god because they don't believe in a God. They don't believe if there is a God, he's not good, and they would say all these things. But in the end, every knee will bow. There's no avoiding it. Don.
In chapter 2, he does kneel and bow.
Uh-huh.
He bows to Daniel and
Right.
worships God, gives praise to God at that point at the end of chapter 2.
He does after he has his first encounter with God, but before that, right, he would not have countenanced the idea of bowing before any foreign god. And that's part of that growth in faith that we've talked about. All right, so we wrapped up chapter 4, and now we're ready to, as a brief wrap up chapter 4, you underestimate me, my idea of stretching the brevity.
I got a pretty good joke here coming up. It's going to be pretty good.
Oh, no, it's a good one? Okay.
It's fantastic. You're going to love it. All right.
I'm ready.
Do the first 4 verses. All right. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the kings, his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
Okay. Well, who is this king? King what's he what?
Belshazzar.
Belshazzar. And just 3 verses ago, who was the king? Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebi.
So we are sometime into the future, and just chronologically, Belshazzar is not Nebuchadnezzar's son. So when it when it refers to Nebuchadnezzar as the father of Belshazzar, that's kind of like saying Jesus was the son of David. I had that at one point. I had it written down, but I don't know where I put it. Matthew, somewhere in Matthew, is where it said it. But Jesus is called the son of David. Wait a minute, was Jesus David's son? No, there was a few generations in between there, right? And so it's in that same vein. Nebuchadnezzar was Belshazzar's grandfather. A king by the name of Nabonidus, if I said that right, is actually is actually the king at this point, and Belshazzar is a co-regent with him, or is a kind of a throne holder, as Nabonidus is off kind of under gallivanting, or actually under some kind of, some sources say he was under a self-imposed exile. Why you would exile yourself if you're the king, I have no idea. But that's what they called it in some of the reading I did. And so,
Self-imposed retirement.
yeah, well, that's different than exile. And so Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, and he is acting as king in his father's stead within the royal city of Babylon. And there's some things that he was able to do as king, some things that he was not able to do because he wasn't really the king yet. And that gets into some of the things that later on about the stuff he promises Daniel. So there's some, just some clarification type stuff there. And then also just this quick question, is there, look at chapter 7, Daniel chapter 7, verse 1 says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions. So what we know, if you know the story of chapter 5 already, this is the last night of Belshazzar's reign. But then in chapter 7, we're going to see in the first year of Belshazzar's reign. So do we have a chronology problem in Daniel? Well, only if you think it has to be chronological order from start to finish. And it doesn't have to be. That's not the way the book of Daniel is arranged. It's not arranged chronologically. It's arranged thematically. Don?
When Nebuchadnezzar was during his little growing his feathers and his talons and things like that?
Well, not chapter 5, and probably not chapter 7 either, because in chapter 5, Belshazzar doesn't seem to know who Daniel is. And so it would be weird if that was that closely associated with, if there was that much overlap between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, that Belshazzar had never heard of Daniel at that point. So I would have difficulty placing it there myself. This seems to be later on. And Nabonidus reigned, I can't remember now. I want to say at least 11 years. It seems like what I read, but I can't remember now exactly how many years Nabonidus was king after Nebuchadnezzar's death. So I'll have to look that back up. I can't remember. I want to say 11 years, but I could be wrong. So this would be, obviously, if by the end of the chapter we're going to have a new king, this is the last night of Belshazzar and Nabonidus' reign, however they had that arranged in their regency and co-regency. No, sir. We're still on verse 4.
Okay, well, I'll let you get to verse
Okay.
11 and we'll look at that.
All right. What sin was committed here in the opening part of the chapter?
A lot.
Just take your pick.
Specific idolatry.
Idolatry, some drunkenness, some debauchery, some carousing, all those kind of things, and it was probably some pride and arrogance stacked up on top of all those things, because taking the temple vessels from a conquered people that were dedicated to their God, who your grandfather, by the way, recognized as a pretty important God, and now taking those vessels and using those to honor your idols, that's a big deal. That would not have been just like a fun party trick or party favor. That would have been done on purpose as a sign of the superiority of your gods over the gods of those conquered peoples. So they did that intentionally and on purpose to bring dishonor on the God of that conquered people, not just for fun. It was a statement being made. Okay.
Well, so, I think pride, and this is specifically pulling that back into the text, he, verse 1 says he drank wine in front of the thousands. So, I mean, that at least to me, seems like he's in front of people. He's front and center, and he's proud and he's posturing and he's saying, look at how great I am, and I'm so great, let's go and mock the God of Jehovah and take from the temple in Jerusalem and all these things and bring them in. I've also read and different things that would say that having his wives and his concubines mixing amongst the kings and lords would not have been a natural occasion. Usually you try to keep those, in their day, usually you try to keep your wives, your concubines separate from other men. For some reason, was one of the things that they said might have been historical, and that might be another example of him promoting sin. But yes, he was getting drunk in front of them and was drinking this stuff. And then one of the other things that I was going to put up here was the very last verse. The last verse, verse 4, says, he praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. And what does that remind you of? The specific delineation there. The statue. And now I don't know how much, obviously, to bring in from that story of what Daniel, the writing in this, is trying to bring to mind, but there's a little bit of a hint back to the statue here. And one of my thoughts was, maybe this was some sort of hint that one of the things that he was doing was praising himself and his military might and his nation, but that's, I thought, was quite a bit of a stretch. But the thing that I think was what I ultimately put on the slide was one of the sins that he was committing, and I guess the things that he was lacking here was he lacked accountability. His grandfather, as we've been talking about, was Nebuchadnezzar at the end. Again, we don't know the end of Nebuchadnezzar's life, but Nebuchadnezzar had to have let his family know about this, and he had to have known about these things. And as we'll see, Belshazzar will say, it's either he doesn't know the king or he has heard about the king. He doesn't know Daniel or he's heard about Daniel, but he doesn't know him, if you will. He's not one of Daniel is not one of his first on the list kind of guys. But he lacked accountability. He was given lots of great things. He had seen the great power of God in his grandfather. At least at some point had heard about it, maybe even was alive at the time it was happening. Or was alive around the time or heard stories about it. And he had that blessing of knowing about God Jehovah and yet decided, you know what, I don't care. He lacked humility in the fact that he was prideful. He was talking about himself, and he used the holy relics of Jehovah as mere drinking glasses at their party. And he lacked sanctity. These are the holy relics of Jehovah, and took the golden vessels of God and profaned them with a service that they were not rendered for. And so in our lives, we have the message of God. We have a story, an accounting, a telling of how great God is, and we have accountability to do the things that God is calling us to do, to live according to the way God is calling us to live. We should be humble in the fact that we are God's servant. We are called to be servants of the Most High, servants of one another. And finally, I specifically talking about misusing the sanctified vessels. In the New Testament, where our bodies are called the sanctified vessels of the Holy Spirit. And so, we need to make sure that what we're doing with the vessels of God, with the vessels of Jehovah, are sanctified and things that are good for glory and worship and honor to Him, and not either mundane or profane.
Right. Well said. And I like all those ties back to the. There's a common thread through a lot of these stories, and it's good to point those out. And so the lessons that Nebuchadnezzar learned, well, here we have a new generation, and guess what? He's going to have to learn some of those same lessons. He doesn't get nearly as long to learn them, but he has to learn those things. Well, let's jump into chapter 5, verses 5 through 9.
Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a gold chain around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writings or made known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed.
Well, something strange is afoot. Or maybe a hand. I don't know. So it's
Well, when something strange is coming through your neighborhood, who you going to call?
Daniel.
The Chaldeans, wise men, people have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was
Yeah.
I just had to throw that out there right now.
All right.
But
Yeah.
I piggybacked off what you're saying.
All
Anyways.
right. So, well, something strange happens. Now, something you don't see every day. A hand appears and starts writing on a wall. That would elicit a response from most people. And it seems to sober him up pretty quickly, doesn't it? I mean, the wine has been flowing. He's been drinking heavily. They made a point of talking about the wine and everything. So he seems to become sober very, very quickly, as one would do in a strange or in a strange situation like this. The king's reaction is very telling about his own confidence, I think, in his station, in his ability to problem solve, or to, as soon as this happens, he doesn't have any answers, and he recognizes very quickly that he doesn't have any answers, and so he's got to find somebody who does have the answers. It's not unlike, I don't think, Nebuchadnezzar's reaction to his dream in the first one that he had. Because his first dream, he has a pretty unreasonable reaction. Tell me what the dream is, and if you can't tell me what the dream is, I'm going to kill you all. That was a pretty telling reaction to the dream about how he felt about it. And I think we have something similar here being played out. If you see that kind of a similar thread through the story about the way the kings react. And so here we have a call for wise. How many times have we called the wise men? We had King Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. We had King Nebuchadnezzar's second dream. Now we have Belshazzar's incident with the hand on the wall. Every time something big happens, we're calling for the wise men. How often have the wise men been of help?
They're batting not 1,000, that's for sure.
Well, they're batting 1,000 at being useless. And so here again, I mean, it's just a thread to follow through. Every time something weird happens, we got to check with the wise men first, but they can't answer it. And then what do? Then we call the man of God. Maybe we should call the man of God first. Maybe we should check with God first when things are when things are weird. Let's ask God first to straighten those things out for us.
Well, when something strange is in your neighborhood, you got to call Jesus, not Ghostbusters. But the other thing that, I already mentioned this before, but he's standing in front of these people, and the handwriting was writing on the wall, writing on the plaster of the wall. Now there's a funny joke in there about the state of the man who is witnessing this. He is, anyways, watching the plaster on the wall being written in opposite the lampstand. So it's like this wasn't in a dark corner. This was right where you could see it. There was light shining on this. It was very visible. But he's down in front, and he was proud, and he was posturing, and he's drinking wine, and he's calling for all these. He's the party host, and yet when he sees the writing on the wall, he goes from party host to the king to some weak, quivering, knee-knocking fella. And there's just a large change. And I mean, I'll talk about it in the next slide that comes up, or well, I guess it's in a couple more, but the difference, but also the similarities between this situation and the one we just read in chapter 4, that both kings were thinking, man, I'm great. I'm center of attention. I'm surrounded by all these great things that I have done, and look at how cool I am. And then in that moment, something happens that God causes them to be humbled, to be completely humbled, and to be knocked off their high horse. And obviously, we'll see that this king doesn't quite respond like Nebuchadnezzar. He is killed before that opportunity. But there are lots of similarities through here that we'll see show up as we continue.
All right, verses 10 through 12.
The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So here's my great joke. Here's the question. Here's my great joke. What's the difference between Belshazzar and Daniel?
The letter T.
Daniel knows what's going on, and he's got all the tea.
Oh, he's got all the tea. All right. He's
pretty
will
good.
spill the tea. All right. My middle schoolers would like that one. The queen, and again, here we have some identification things going on because Belshazzar is identified as the king, but it appears that he's probably not the king. He's probably a placeholder for the king, or he is in some sort of a co-regency with his father Nabonidus. And here we have summoned the queen. Well, we've already been talking about his wives and his concubines were dancing around the hall already, and here comes in this woman who all of a sudden knows something about Daniel. Well, this is not the queen as in Belshazzar's wife. It can't be. And so it's most likely Nabonidus' wife, which would be Belshazzar's mother. And it's probably through her that the relation to Nebuchadnezzar can be established. Nabonidus was probably had probably been a general or a royal under Nebuchadnezzar, and then and there's a king between Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus as well, who Nabonidus assassinated with Belshazzar's help. But and so his claim to the throne comes from the fact that he's married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. And so she is the queen mother in this case, the mother of the king who is sitting on the throne in Babylon at this point. Chuck?
Comes in and immediately realizes or remembers Daniel,
Right.
you know, and immediately brings this up.
Yeah.
You know, hey, Daniel knows this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
He's got this gift from God.
She is privy to some things that Belshazzar either has never known or has never paid attention to or has willfully rejected or just never knew, you know, or has forgotten or something. So she has information that can help, and she is willing to point Belshazzar in the right direction. Don, we just read verse 11. You had a thought.
Well, the thought was that this time has passed,
Yes.
and this could be possibly during that time is what I'm saying, because the king is not, that we're talking about, is not available, obviously.
Nabonidus, yeah.
And Nebuchadnezzar, but they're referring back to Nebuchadnezzar.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar is dead. Nebuchadnezzar is long dead.
But what I'm saying is they're referring back to him, referring back to all the things that he brought.
Right.
Because what I have here is Nebuchadnezzar, and the Bible says here. So is who it's referring to in this.
King Nebuchadnezzar, your father. So he is a generation removed. But so and another thing is, so from the sources that would you like to know when this happened? Belshazzar, October 12th, 539 BC. I mean, they put a date to it, not just like we think it happened around this time, but they're fairly certain. So we have the first captives coming, Daniel coming over that first round of captives in, what was it, 605 BC? So we're almost at the end of the 70 years here. Nebuchadnezzar this is far past Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And so we are, that would be my take on it. And so they are referring back to Nebuchadnezzar. You can't ignore Nebuchadnezzar as king because he was the greatest king of the Babylonian era, who reigned for, well over 40 years for sure. And he was that head of gold, or he was, the head of gold that represented that Babylonian kingdom. And so the Babylonian kingdom under the king that succeeded Nebuchadnezzar, and then under Nabonidus and now under Belshazzar, has been in decline. Babylon is not under Belshazzar what it had been under Nebuchadnezzar. Melissa?
My footnote also says that there were 3 more rulers in between Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus.
And some of them didn't last very long, and
Yeah,
I'm
2
not
months.
sure, of the status as king, bearing the title of king of some of them. But and so there was some overlap, and there was some, but we're talking, a generation has passed since Nebuchadnezzar. If you think of a generation being 25 years or so, we're looking at a significant amount of time since Nebuchadnezzar's death since this. Now, Nabonidus had kind of established himself and had been king for, 14 or 15 years maybe at this point, although part of that was under that self-imposed exile or whatever that was. And so Belshazzar, the historical people say Belshazzar was basically just kind of biding his time. He didn't have full authority as king. There were certain things he couldn't do. What he could do was throw parties, and he could kind of oversee some official functions. But he was waiting for Nabonidus to vacate the premises so that he could be the real king. And so there's a lot of historical records that feed into this. That the Bible is, I think, the historical record over and over and over again confirms what the Bible says, and we have little snapshots of things here in the Bible. That Daniel is not written for the purpose of giving us a succession of the Babylonian kings. We would say there is a purpose to there being a succession of the Israelite kings. We want historical records to confirm the order of the Israelite kings when we can see those things found in the historical record. But for this, we're not trying to establish that the kingship went from Nebuchadnezzar to Belshazzar and there was nobody in between. And if the historical record says different, then we're going to take issue with it. Because that's not the point. That's not the purpose. And so we're getting little vignettes and little snapshots of things that happened. That, it's confirmed historically that Belshazzar's reign as co-regent ended very abruptly, out of the blue. It's like he was king one day and then he was dead the next. And the historical record confirms that, and just like we have happened in this story here in the Bible. Anyway, it's a interesting. I love the history of it, and I like reading about it and seeing how it confirms what the Bible tells us and those kind of things. So the queen mother comes in, and she has heard of Daniel, and she now informs her son, presumably Belshazzar, informs him about a guy named Daniel. So the legend of Daniel lives on, even though perhaps the details of some of the things that Daniel has done has been forgotten by the next generation. We have people who were there and witnessed it and heard about those things firsthand, who remember who Daniel is. And she comes in to kind of save the day here.
So I put up there the man, the myth, the legend, just because, again, this story is sometimes grow in the telling, but it's kind of hard to grow the telling of the story of what Daniel's been doing. But she explains there, interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems. So it's also likely that, the snapshots we have of Daniel's life weren't the only ways that he was serving to the king. We also looked at how Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar at least had some form of a relationship when he said, if this was only for your enemies, O King Nebuchadnezzar. And so in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, at least at some point, they had a relationship. There was more going on that Daniel helped with than just the couple of stories that we have. But the next thing that I put on there was the old guy, because Daniel's got to be pretty old by now, because there's a 70-year captivity, and he went away in the very beginning of the captivity, and this is toward the end of it. This is the reign of this very night, what's-his-bucket, Belshazzar is going to die. And the Medo-Persian Empire, with Darius and Cyrus, kind of kings sort of in their own right, sort of together, and there's a history there. But King Cyrus is the one that tells him to go back. The captivity is over. And so Daniel, knowing that, hey, there's going to be a 70-year captivity, knowing that, hey, it's going to be King Cyrus. Oh, hey, I know a King Cyrus. I'm pretty sure it's, I wonder how many of these puzzle pieces Daniel has put together by this point and is getting, older in years, knowing, well, hey, it's only a couple more years until God said this captivity is going to end. I've heard stories and tellings in Isaiah of this guy named Cyrus, and that's the king of Persia that's slowly creeping in on us. And the other thing that has been interesting is this is the night that Belshazzar dies. And if you look back into history, the night that Belshazzar dies, the Medo-Persian Empire is currently attacking / besieging the city. And so and again, there's historical records, and obviously it's not in the text, but he's trying to throw a party during the time when his empire is being attacked, and which is just another interesting thought. But granted, he had a lot to be proud of because his walls were so big. They could have chariot races on them. They were, I don't know how accurate it is, but they said it could be anywhere from 8 to 9 stories tall of walls that they had that go around the city. And so he was sitting there, I don't care about these people outside. I don't care necessarily about my life. And this evening they're going to be infiltrated and murdered, and they're all going to die. Well, not all of them, because Daniel obviously still survives. But there is, as we've been talking, there's historical context going on here, and Daniel is getting closer toward the end of that captivity, maybe looking at all of these things coming together, and seeing the writing on the wall, as it were.
Is that where that saying came from? All right. All right, well, moving on, 13 through 16.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that the light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make it known to me, its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be a third ruler in the kingdom.
All right, so introductions are made. He calls Daniel in. Are you the guy that I've been hearing stories about? Are you the one? And it could be that, from the way Belshazzar talks here, it's like some of these stories sound familiar to him. He just didn't think of the possibility that Daniel's still around. I heard the stories of a guy that could interpret dreams. I heard the stories of a guy that served my grandfather, but he's still around? He's got to be old by now because my grandfather's been gone a while. So, there's, he has to figure out who Daniel is. But it's also kind of an important deal, and it's not like we're going to sit down and chit chat for a long time. We're gonna establish, I'm the king. You're the one that I've heard about. I've got a job for you. Let's get to work, and so they get that taken care of, and then the king makes really what sounds like a generous offer. If you are able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you'll be clothed with purple and wear a necklace of gold around your neck. You'll have authority as a third ruler in the kingdom. That sounds pretty good. So what's the significance of those things? Purple was the royal color. I just recently watched a thing, by the way, that said, the color purple doesn't even exist. I can show you a video about it if you wanted to know. And it's not like a slam against K-State. It's like there are no purple ions in the light spectrum. Anyway, he could wear a necklace of gold around his neck. I would have to assume that had some significance.
Becomes a rapper?
No, this is not like the giant clock like Flava Flav. That would have some royal symbol or something of significance, not just a gold chain. And you will have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. Why do you suppose it's the third ruler?
Well, because there's already a first, and he's the second.
Because Belshazzar is second in command. He doesn't have authority to make anybody second in command because that's his spot. Nabonidus is the king, and Belshazzar can't make him second in command. He has to make him third in command in the kingdom. So, that's a little detail that comes into play and makes sense when you understand where Belshazzar lies in the hierarchy. So it sounds like a generous offer. How does Daniel reply?
He says, throw it in the dirt. But also, before we move on, I didn't put it up there, but I wonder what was going through Belshazzar's thought process when his mother, or queen mother, or whatever, just told him, hey, there's a man from Judah whose gods you were just mocking that knows how to do this. And so this introduction, to me, who knows what was going through his mind, but that's an interesting thought.
Is Belshazzar like, hide all the gold, hide all the stuff we've got from their temple? I don't know if he would have had that thought.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, start reading, but Chuck's going to ring the bell.
All right. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, I'll just read really fast.
Okay.
Let your gifts be before yourself and give your words to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and tongues trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. Whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast. And his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he wills. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you and your lords, your wives and your concubines have drunk wine from them, and you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, of iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways you have not honored. Then from the presence the hand was sent, and the writing was inscribed.
All right, Chuck. He says that he knew. You knew the story of your grandfather, whether he was there to witness that or not. And you have to think that, King Nebuchadnezzar goes and lives in the wilderness like a donkey. It says he doesn't do that and then everybody just forgets about him. He's got a retinue. What if our ruler did that today? What goes with him? The Secret Service goes with him. He had his retinue of servants. He had his people that were there tending to him, that were keeping him safe. If you think the ruler of the most powerful ruler in the world goes out and lives and eats grass out of the field, that there's not going to be some people that would like to kill him. So he was protected during that time. So there were people who witnessed this. There were people who saw it. Belshazzar, as his grandson, might have been out in the field visiting Grandpa while he's living like a donkey. You don't know that. We don't know that for one way or the other. But at the very least, he's heard the stories. And so the stories of how Grandpa got there would have had to have been a part of that story. You got there because he profaned God. And what have you been doing all night? The other thing is Daniel's response. Think of how Daniel responded to King Nebuchadnezzar's last dream in chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar told him the dream. Daniel realizes what the dream means. And how does Daniel respond?
I wish it was your enemies.
I wish it was your enemies. I really wish this wasn't true. I wish this wasn't going to happen to you. How does Daniel respond to the king Belshazzar?
You've been praising these gods, which do not see nor hear.
He gets no sympathy at all. Belshazzar, you're getting what you deserve. This is the fact that Belshazzar doesn't know who Daniel is, doesn't know who Daniel's God is inexcusable, considering who his grandfather was, which goes back to the whole discussion we've had about what was Nebuchadnezzar's faith. Had Nebuchadnezzar told these stories specifically to his grandson, someday you might be a ruler. Someday you need to understand that there's a God in heaven that you need to give honor to. Someday you don't want to go through what I went through and having to live out in the wilderness. Maybe that was part of the discussion. Maybe that's why Belshazzar knew the story, was because Nebuchadnezzar was the one telling him. And so Daniel's response to Belshazzar is way different than it is to Nebuchadnezzar. And I don't think it's just because Daniel's feeling surly in his old age. I think it's because Belshazzar had the opportunity to do what was right, and he had rejected that, whereas Nebuchadnezzar was learning along the way. And when he had the opportunity to learn, he took advantage of it. Belshazzar had the opportunity to learn, and he had spurned it. That's speculation. But it checks. Yeah. Yeah. Well, think of how did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego address Nebuchadnezzar? We will not bow down to you, O king. You don't know better yet, but you're about to know better. And by the time Daniel comes for those later interactions with Nebuchadnezzar, it's a much gentler approach because Nebuchadnezzar has done the right thing, at least to some degree along the way, has responded correctly. Okay, we'll pick up there next week, with or without you.
I'll just start making my bullets very cryptic.